Hi, my name is Chris with Pomodoro Architects, and today I'm going to talk about Sketchup's move command. Okay, so Sketchup's move command, it's how you move things around within the modeling program. Things you can move are points, edges, faces, groups, components, and basically anything else that there might be, like the north arrow or the location if you have that tool to do that, section planes, all sorts of things. Also plugins, some of them have lights, and so you can move lights around. There are two main ways of using the move command. One is by pre-selecting objects and then clicking move, or you can just click move and use the auto select feature. So we'll show you both that. So if I pre-select objects, so if I either hit the space bar or the arrow button here, and I can pre-select things, and then I click on the move button, I prefer to use the shortcut M for move, and just move things around. Now you can just pick a point, space, click another point, and it moves it. That's basically pre-selecting. Now with pre-selecting, it gives you the option to pick multiple things, but I'll cover that next. Auto select, with auto selecting, you first pick move and then just hover over things. So if you clicked on an object and just clicked away, you just hover and you can just move things on the fly. Doing Control Z to undo things to get back to where I was. Now, an interesting thing about auto select, it's the only way you can move a point. There is no way of pre-selecting a point. When you have auto select on, you can hover and pick a point of a line, for instance, and then move it, stretch it. This cube, for instance, it hasn't been grouped yet, and I can click on a point and stretch and move things willy-nilly as I wish. So that's the big advantage of auto select. It's probably the only time I really use auto select. Otherwise, I almost always pre-select. Now, the advantage of pre-select is also when you want to select multiple objects or deselect objects from a selection set. So for instance, if I click on that face and I hold Control, I get a plus symbol next to the selection, and I can add multiple things by clicking, and then hit M for move, and I can move those items. If, say, I have too many things, I can go back to my selection set, and I can hold Control and then Shift as well, and then I can deselect certain things from that selection set and move those. Now, there is one last option of Shift. You can just hold Shift and you get a plus minus. What that means is I can click on things, adding, but if something is already selected and I click it again, it deselects it. I don't really use it that much because it just gets a little confusing sometimes when I have a wide selection. I just prefer to, I know I'm adding and I know I'm subtracting with Control or Shift Control. So that's usually what I use. Now, another way of selecting things is with the window. So you can do a window from left to right as a window. Now what that means in the window is that objects have to be inside the window to be selected. You can also do a crossing from right to left, and you get that dash line. Now that means anything that crosses it will be selected. Anything that's inside and crosses will be selected. Now, in combination with the Control and Shift, you can keep adding to a selection with that. You can subtract with the holding Control and Shift together, and then doing crossings or windows, however you wish. But those subtleties are important to master in order when you're trying to manipulate a large object, moving things around, moving a big group of things, multiple, like a lot of furniture in a space. It's good to master how to use windows and crossings and whatnot with Control and Shift for picking things. And then again, it's an M and you can move. So then from there, obviously the main point of moving is to move an object from one location to another location. You can just click, and in this case I'm on the zero plane. It is the default. When I click, it just defaults to clicking on anything on that zero plane. It doesn't move it up or down, it just stays kind of on that plane by default. You can also snap to things. The main snaps are midpoint, endpoint, and intersection. There might be a few others. There's center point actually with circles, and you can. So I'll try to draw one right now. So if I were to say this corner, you can click on the center point, Intersection happens when two objects that aren't merged together intersect. If they're merged together, then it just becomes an endpoint. But if, say, for instance, this is a component, and if I were to draw a line here, and then just let me scale that line up for the moment. I'll talk about scale in another section. That right there would be considered an intersection. I can move one object, say for instance this corner, to that intersection. It detects intersections. So those are the kinds of snaps. Should probably do a thorough study of all the snaps available, but those are the big ones I use. Endpoint, midpoint, intersection, and center of a circle. So then there's that. So then you can also move objects along the XYZ axis or the red, green, blue axis. So if you have an object selected and you hit M on the keyboard, again, I highly recommend using shortcuts versus the icons. If you're new to SketchUp or any program, take the time to learn shortcuts. It is by far faster, in my opinion, than moving the mouse, taking the time to move away from the work to click on things and coming back again. You just have your other hand free to click on shortcuts. So again, if I move an object in just a diagonal, for instance, it can just move anywhere in space. But if I move it in the general, say, direction of the X, or in this case, red axis, I can lock, kind of snap to that and then click. I can also do that in the Y direction. I can also do that in the Z direction if I kind of generally move mouse in that direction, and then it did move it off the plane. So that is kind of just using the inference of that. Let's see, where are we? So you can also lock that. So let's say, for instance, I'm moving and I want to move this in the Z direction. I can hit Shift, and that blue line turns bold. What that means is now it's locked, and I can move the mouse now anywhere I want, and it stays locked in the Z direction. And I can click on another object, like the top of the square or the cube, and you can see that it aligned it to the top of that. I can also, say, click on here, and if I go in the Y direction, hit Shift, I can lock it, and now I've aligned those 2 points. And let's say if I were to float away and then go in the X direction, hit Shift, and I can lock it and align those 2 points. So it's a way of getting things to align where you want to move them. Pretty handy. The other cool thing about the Shift is that you can also, which is really nice, move things along. Let me get this back down to the plane. So I'm going to move and align to there, and then just kind of move in space here. You can also move things along a diagonal and hold Shift to go beyond the diagonal. So if I hit move and say I click this diagonal, I can move it along that line and click. But you see how that turns purple? It actually, if I keep going in the general direction of that line, you can see that it lets me do that as like an inference. It lets me go parallel to that edge. If I hit Shift, it'll lock that, and now I can like snap to things that would be, I guess, perpendicular to that edge in terms of alignment from where I clicked. So that's another interesting way of using the Shift option. I use it a lot when I make roofs, for instance, and you have three-dimensional angles going. So that's where I've used that feature. Now, what I use more often, actually, though, are the arrow keys on the keyboard to lock the X, Y, and Z, or the RGB, the red, green, blue axis. And the way you do that is you click on the object you want to move, and then if I hit the arrow key, say up or down, that locks it in the Z axis. To the left locks it in the Y axis, and to the right locks it in the X axis. And again, you can then snap to things while being locked in that axis, which is really nice, again, for aligning things. And I use that one a lot. That's definitely my go-to way of moving things. Talked about the diagonal. Inferences. An interesting aspect of inferences is that SketchUp, as you hover over things, will kind of make guesses of what you might be interested in. That's what I found. So say, for instance, let's say this box was over here, and I move it, and let's say I just kind of hover and just stay on that point, but I'm not clicking. I stay on that point for a little bit, and then I move back to where the cube was. You notice it's creating an inference between the point as it originally where it started, the corner that I picked, versus the one I hovered over, and it created a perpendicular intersection. Sketchup does a lot of that for you, of these kind of inferences, trying to guess at what you're looking for. And then I could click there, and it would have aligned those two cubes at that point. So that it's interesting. You can play with that a lot, in terms of trying to find inference. Like, say if I went to this circle here. Now with the circle, it's interesting. I'm having a little bit of trouble picking the circle, but if I hit K, which I'm going to jump a couple steps here, but if I hit that, I can now see through things, and it's letting me pick, and then the circle shows up. So that's one way that I get it to activate circles. If I kind of hover around the edge, and then I can see that circle, and then I can click on the circle. But now that circle is there, it lets me kind of move up. It lets me lock to that circle, and I can move up on it. So the corner of this is perfectly centered on that circle. So lots of ways you can use that when moving around. Kind of can save a couple clicks moving things, by using that. And then, so we're talking about inferences. Now, specific dimensions and distances. Now, as an architect, that's what I use it for. Sketchup for is I do have to work in fairly precise dimensions. Most projects that you're going to build, you're going to want to have some dimensions. If it's maybe for a game, you don't need to be so precise, but for anything you're going to actually try to assemble or use materials, you want to model things and move things around at the right scale. So for doing that, in terms of moving things precisely, let's say, for instance, this box, I wanted to move it exactly 2 feet, and say this in the Y direction down. I can just drag the mouse in that general direction and type 2 feet with the apostrophe, and it moved it 2 feet. I can do 2 feet 4 inches, and I'll move it 2 feet 4 inches. What's interesting too about SketchUp is that a little different than most other applications that you have to predetermine your units. SketchUp, you do pick your units, so you pick your feet and inches in the beginning with a template, or you're going to work in metric system with meters or centimeters. I, as an architect, work in feet and inches, and the default minimum unit. So I guess what it means when you pick that template, if I understand it correctly, is that when you say just do a unitless number, so if I just hit 1 and enter, that 1 for me means 1 inch here. Now, if for some reason I was working with somebody overseas and they're working in metric, I can still type in 1 meter, and it'll move it 1 meter. I could type in 14 centimeters, and it'll move it 14 centimeters, or millimeters, or even kilometers probably. Be careful with going too big, because then that creates other problems with your models when you go too large. But basically you can work across units. I don't recommend doing that too often because it can get confusing. But if you're importing or modeling something that you only have metric units of, you don't have to convert it first. You can just draw it in those units. And you'll know it's accurate to the right scale within what you're working with. So that's with units. So the directions, so we did that in one direction. You can go up. Also locking, typically that I do lock, and then I'll type in, say, 10 feet. If I wanted to go 10 feet, I can zoom out, and that moved up 10 feet. And so that's basically, you can also do that along lines. And say if I'm moving along this line on a diagonal and I want to go 5 feet, and it moves it in that direction 5 feet. You can also, let's say, for instance, for whatever reason, I'm going this direction, but I want to go the other way. I can do negative 5 feet, and it'll go the negative direction that I dragged it. Now, there is, similar to AutoCAD, you can also move things relative to a point with the XYZ coordinates, and also to the absolute coordinate system. So for instance, say this cube, let's say I want to move it over 2 feet, up 2 feet, and in all directions 2 feet, like to the X direction 2 feet, Y direction 2 feet, and the Z direction 2 feet. Well, I can use the brackets, and you can see how down here at the bottom, you have to look there while I do it. When I type the bracket, that shows up, and I can do 2 feet, comma 2 feet, comma 2 feet, and it did that. It moved it up off the plane 2 feet, over 2 feet, and across 2 feet. Now, if I want to go absolute, so this XYZ here, that's the 0, 0, like the world coordinate system in AutoCAD speak. It's the origin of the model. I could click on this and do the bracket and do 0, 0, 0, and it moves it to that spot. If I had some kind of precise layout where I always was drawing from a reference 0, 0 like that, I could then say click that point and do, like, let's say I can, this could be anywhere actually, but I can say I want to put it at 10 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. And it didn't like that. Let me try that again because I forgot to hit the square. There we go. So 10 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. Hit enter, and I forgot my comma. Let's try that one more time. 10 feet, 10 feet, 5 feet. There we go. Okay, third time's the charm. So you can see what it did is 10 feet over this way, and 5 feet off the plane. And you can check that by either drawing a line and measuring it. Like if I draw a line and I snap to that, says 5 feet there at the bottom under the length. If I go in the other directions, 10 feet and 10 feet. So you can do things very precisely that way. So that's relative and absolute. Lastly, which I already did here, and you can see it, is you can use styles to snap to things that you normally can't see. So let's say, for instance, I want to snap here, and my view is like this, and I want to snap to the cube that's behind there, but my view is being blocked. So there's two ways to do that. One is orbiting around, which we'll get to the next, but the one quick way is with styles. And I use styles of either X-ray or the back faces. This is up here in the, I forget what they call this, let me drag it out under styles. I guess you have X-ray and back faces. There's wireframe and then some other options in terms of how to render the faces and materiality. I'll put that back. And so I always like to use the back face one, where I can see the back faces, and I just hit K on the keyboard for that. And now we can see through things. It's like you see the hidden geometry. And what's nice is now it lets you click on that hidden geometry. So if I wanted to click that face to there, I can do that. Whereas if I don't have that, it gets all weird. It doesn't know where I want to put it. But if I click, then I can now see and click on an object. So that's an easy way. Another thing, you can also use X-ray. X-ray is kind of cool too. A little more intensive, I think, for rendering if you have a slower computer. But that's a pretty neat way too. You can also click and see through and click on endpoints and whatnot. Now, the last thing to talk about, which I've seen me do a little bit, is you can, while moving, you can navigate. So you can pan, around. You can orbit, and I'm still in the middle of the move command, and you can zoom as well, still in the middle of the move command. This is great for when you have a very large model and you've got one object in, like, say, one room, and you want to copy it or something and move it into another room, and you just can't see it all in one shot. So you have to move around through space to get from one spot to the other, and that's very important to do that. So that basically summarizes, fairly in-depth use of the move command. I highly suggest you play with all of those features, get really used to that. That's critical in learning how to manipulate a model, either the points, the lines, or objects as a whole. And so if you hopefully like the video, and I'll try to do some more, on copying and on arraying, which is also part of the move command. There's one last thing I will mention here, I forgot to, is when you click on the move, you do get these little squares here. That actually is for rotating. You can click on those and rotate things around the center points of that. Kind of handy for quick, quickly arranging furniture in kind of a random way if you want to rotate them a little bit, tweak them for a nice rendering. It looks a little more natural rather than being so stiff. I don't typically use this so much. I actually use the rotate command for rotating objects, and I'll do another video about rotation later on. But just wanted to point that out if you're wondering what that is when you hit move. It does give you a quick access to rotating objects around. But again, I don't use that particular feature that much. Okay, well, take care. Bye.